Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about self-control, right? So that concept is a pretty interesting one, if I do say so myself. How can a behavior analytic account framework, right, start making sense out of this kind of topic? So what exactly is impulsivity? How do you guys generally talk about it, right? What does this mean? As Carlos always says, what behaviors are we looking at? So it seems to be involved with some kind of choice, as we talked about earlier, right? So you had alternative behaviors you can engage in, but you engaged in one that was considered impulsive by, let's say, the general community. So I only have $10. I need to save it to pay my school bill for something, and I'm at the store and I see a really, really cool rocket sticker. I want the sticker. The impulsive choice would probably be to buy the sticker, right? Instead of saving it for school. That might be considered impulsive, right? So what about self-control? What does that look like? So if we think about that kind of situation again, what would the self-control choice be? It would be me saving my money instead of spending it on something that I don't need at the moment, right? I want it, but I don't need it. And how do I even learn this kind of stuff? How does this even work? How can a behavior analytic framework start to get us to understand this kind of phenomenon? So let's watch a little video to see what this marshmallow test is. It's a very popular test that was conducted by some psychologists.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right.
Okay, so it looks like these children are presented with a choice. If you eat it now, you'll only eat one.
I'm gonna go do something, and then I'll come back.
If you wait, you'll get to eat two. So what are the kids gonna do? If they eat it, that would be impulsive, right? If they don't eat it, that would be self-control.
I would have ate it so bad, so quickly. Look at all these behaviors that they're engaging while they wait.
And again, there's no restrictions. They are free to eat it if they so
choose. You can have it now or you can wait.
Choose.
Okay. I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay.
And they have to wait 15 minutes.
Yep. Open and bite.
Practicing.
There we go.
Oh, they're breaking. She broke.
Oh, shoot. These little kids.
All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay?
She's like, why are you still talking? I'm already eating it. She's like, nope.
How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you I'd give you another one?
Okay.
Okay, now you can have
So
both.
the delay, the 15 minutes,
Damn, both.
he got his reward, right? He got his two. So in this scenario, that kid had self-control, right? Whereas some of his counterparts that were also in the experiment, they ate the marshmallow instead of waiting, and so they only ate one. So how can this framework start to make sense out of the marshmallow test? How could we bring behavior analysis to the situation? So the crux of the experiment, they were asking the participants to choose between a smaller, sooner reward, so that's immediately have one marshmallow, or a larger, later reward, which is wait the 15 minutes and then you'll get access to 2 marshmallows, right? It's completely up to you. I am not going to restrict how you perform. It's just the way the contingencies are laid out.
Yeah. And remember that that's the way we talk about self-control, as Will said, it all depends on the community that we're around, right? So if you noticed in the video, the lady that left came back with the little boy that didn't eat it. And she asked, how did you do? Did you do good? Making it seem that you did good if you didn't eat the marshmallow. And you did bad if you did eat that marshmallow. So she's already punishing or reinforcing one specific choice over the other.
Exactly. And I want you guys to keep that in mind about the role of the community in making these kinds of determinations of what's deemed good and bad. So researchers were interested in trying to understand this scenario, right? It seems to be one that's really important to the world because we're always trying to figure out these kinds of solutions to our problems, right? So for instance, I don't like to work out too much. I like to play basketball, but as Carlos always tells me, that's not working out, you know. So how can I improve my health if I am not engaging in this behavior, right? It's too much work. So here I have my smaller, sooner reward. I get to chill, do whatever I want to do, or my longer delayed reward, which is going to be my better health benefits and probably looking a lot stronger, right? Probably being a lot stronger. So that's how behavior analysts started to conceptualize this. So what do organisms do when offered a choice between rewards of different value and depending on when you get this reward? So let's do a little experiment. So I'm gonna do this on Carlos, okay? So you guys can actually see how this goes down. So Carlos, would you take $10 now or $100 tomorrow?
100 tomorrow.
Okay.
Easy.
So $10 now or $100 in a week?
100 in a week.
$10 now or $100 in 2 weeks?
Ooh, 10 times.
Okay, so
You know what? Oh, no. Yeah, 100 in 2 weeks. Yeah.
100 now or 100 in a month?
10 now, 100 in a month. You know what? 100 in a month.
What about 10 now or 100 in 2 months?
I think I'd still take 100 in 2 months.
All right. What about 10 now, 100 in 6 months?
Maybe 10. I mean, maybe 100. 100.
Okay. What about after a year?
Nah, give me 10 right now.
Okay. So you see, that what is something that researchers call the indifference point. So basically what that's saying is that this $100 in 1 year is equal in value to $10 now, right? So it's the relative subjective value is equal, right? And you can keep extending it, right? And he's probably going to stick to his guns and his choice of, okay, I'd rather just have money now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting, right? So what this kind of experimental setup produces, it shows you how people discount rewards based on the amount of time that has passed. So here we have a graph with the number of years on the bottom and the subjective value of the reward on top, right? So for somebody that's impulsive, right? So they rather have a smaller, sooner reward now than a larger, later reward. So to them, they want it now. So anything outside of that, any delay is going to extremely decrement the value of that reward, right? So it's valued much, much less. I want it now. Whereas Carlos kind of exemplified less discounting, right? The patient is choosing the larger reward, even if it's extended after an amount of time, because it's worth more to him, right? And know that this phenomenon isn't just with humans. It's also found with non-human organisms, rats, pigeons, monkeys. They all tend to show these types of delayed curves, right? And these are kind of like contrasting, but there are kind of like intermediate ones. And it's all based on that person's kind of learning history. Mm-hmm. Some things to keep in mind, this kind of relationship does seem, according to the literature, to stay constant. So if you're impulsive now, more than likely you will continue being impulsive throughout your life. Same goes with somebody that's patient, right? That have self-control. It will likely to be extended. But that is not a dooming sentence, or, because you can change it. And we're going to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Yeah, one thing to consider, just as Will was saying, that it doesn't mean that given these kind of situations or hypothetical examples, it doesn't mean that, oh, you're showing more impulsive choices, you are an impulsive person, right? Because as we've talked about in class, we have all kinds of different variables that may change those results, right? So all those questions that Will was just asking me, I'm pretty sure they're going to change if I was in the negatives in my bank account, right? So let's say I just got paid yesterday, or I just got paid today. My answers might have changed a little bit because of those variables as well. So always keep that in mind as well.
Exactly. And something else that I was going to say is that with this literature, they also say that these hypothetical rewards, right? I didn't actually give Carlos the money, but literature shows that even with hypothetical money, people tend to behave just as if it is the same physical currency. Okay, so basically the whole crux of this paradigm of delayed discounting, or also called temporal discounting, is that you're creating the competition between the smaller sooner reward and the larger later reward, right? Just like the marshmallow test, and just like that questionnaire where I asked Carlos about how much money are you willing to take after with a delay. So again, smaller sooner is considered impulsive behavior, larger later is considered to exemplify self-control. So one of the biggest findings is that regardless of what the reward is, right, whether it's money, whether it's food, regardless what it is, and how much of it, there is going to be a decrease in the amount of influence that reward is going to have on the behavior. So the farther it is from when it's presented, the less value subjectively that it has, and it has less control over the behavior. So here's some things that we know. If I offer someone a different choice between a smaller reward and a larger reward, but both are presented immediately, of course, the rational choice is going to be to choose the bigger reward, right? However, if we offered a choice between an immediate reward and a delayed reward of equal value, most organisms are going to choose the immediate reward, right? So things to consider that, and these are general findings that most studies in this literature area have found.
Yeah, and one thing to think about is that this doesn't just necessarily apply to individuals, but you can also conceptualize it to large groups of people as well. And one example is with common pool resources. And what these are resources that are shared by many people. So we can think about those as such things as oil, water, and food, where more than one person owns a share of whatever resource that is. So if you take an example of the grazing lands, right? Let's say you have thousands of acres being shared by hundreds of thousands of people, right? And each one of those people have X amount of cattle that can graze on that land. They can either choose to smaller sooner reward, which is I can put a bunch of my cattle out in the grasslands and they can consume more immediately. But it's going to have an effect for the majority of those people in the long run later, which means that soon enough you're going to run out of grass, right? So the choices of a smaller sooner reward for the individual is going to be detrimental for the later on in life for the majority of those people. And it's vice versa as well. If you put less cattle in that grassland right now, it's going to be more of a reward for everyone later on in the future, because you could go many years with that same grassland, and it won't be detrimental later on in life. And you could see this with a bunch of resources going out there right now. Water, a bunch of water reservoirs. You could see whenever there's droughts in California, you could see this as well. That's why they start telling people to conserve their water so they could have the amount of reservoir water for a lot longer.
Overfishing as well, right? If you overfish, you're going to completely change how many more fish are going to be available later on. So that could also be looked at, exactly as Carlos was saying, through a delayed discounting kind of paradigm. So again, studies show that populations discount the value of delayed rewards more steeply than comparison groups. So people that didn't have a delay in the reward. So these populations specifically have given this same paradigm, right? The one I ran with Carlos where I asked them, how much money do you want to take after a delay? Children with attention deficit hyperactive disorder tend to discount way more heavily than anyone that is considered typically developing, right? Or the comparison populations. Compulsive gamblers tend to be way more impulsive. Heavy smokers, binge drinkers, people with obesity, heroin addicts, right? So these individuals, when put in that situation, tend to discount way more than people in comparison groups. But one thing to remember, right? Correlation is not a cause. It just so happens that literature shows that these variables tend to kind of co-vary in the same direction, right? But just because they perform in this paradigm in this way doesn't mean that that's the reason why these people in these populations are engaging in this kind of discounting, right? There might be tons of other reasons why the specific populations might engage in these more impulsive behaviors. So one good thing to note, as we talked about earlier, if you do make an impulsive choice, it's not going to be a forever thing. You can change it. Some things that you can do to change the impulsive behavior is you can add progressive delays, right? So whenever you're presenting short-term rewards with larger rewards, you can systematically learn to start taking in the delayed reward, right? So you might start off with both immediate and then move on to one immediate, one after 5 seconds, one after 5 minutes, right? Expanding, thinning, if you will, the requirement, and eventually you'll learn how to engage in that more self-controlled choice. Contingency contracts, a very popular method in behavior analysis where you basically explicitly lay out contingencies and have someone help you enforce those contingencies. Change the contingencies as well, right? We have antecedents, we have consequences. Exactly as Carlos was saying earlier, think about all the things that go into this choice. How can we start changing antecedents and consequences to start influencing and helping people make the more self-controlled choice? So another takeaway is remember that with delayed discounting, this paradigm is meant to make sense out of what happens in the real world. It's an analog of what real conditions, right? So this experiment may not be with the actual big picture phenomenon, but it's a step in that direction, and it's going to give us tons of data to start really asking these questions about delayed discounting. So it allows people to see how choices are influenced by the delay of rewards. Also, it always goes back to the contingencies of reinforcement, right? So it's not that you're impulsive and you're doomed. You're always going to be impulsive. Look at those contingencies that are operating in your environment. Why are you making that choice? It might not be because of that internal trait. It might be some other stuff that are shifting your behavior.
Yeah, and then you can also think of that as the way we progress through our lifetime, right? Whenever we're children, we tend to, very loosely speaking, make a lot of impulsive choices, right? We want everything right now. We want it immediately, right? But as we start getting shaped by our social environment, by our parents, by our teachers, by our peers, later on in life, we're able to wait much longer for the specific rewards that we want, right? We're not going to just sit there and cry because we're not getting it immediately. It's how the specific social environment is shaping us to become more self-control, practice more self-control, if that makes sense.
Exactly. So as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to shoot those our way. We will see you in next week's videos.